introducing the Kilfitt Makro-Kilar 40mm standard prime lens in f3.5 and f2.8 specification. Released some 70 years ago, Kilfitt macro lenses are historically significant for being the first commercially available fully integrated macro lens for 35mm SLR cameras. Revolutionary for their time, Kilfitt lenses are today renowned among collectors and connoisseurs for their unique rendering capabilities, fine tactility, and faceted functionality. Designed by Heinz Kilfitt, of Kilfitt Optische fabric located in Munich, Germany, the 40mm Kilfitt Makro-Kilar f3.5 lens was launched in 1955. The f2.8 variant would follow, in 1958. Considered one of the most gifted, prolific and innovative camera designers of his time, Heinrich Wilhelm Kilfitt would achieve first renown in the early 1930s, as creator of the motorized robot camera. Productionized by Otto Berning & Co., the robot camera was described as a clockwork camera for capturing dynamic photo compositions, and featured a spring mechanism motor, to simultaneously transport film and tension a rotating disc shutter. Heinz Kilfitt is further credited for the somewhat unusual design of the 1953 Mecha Flex, the 1952 Kilfitt Reflex 6x6 medium format camera, and was known to be instrumental in the development of Alpha and Rectiflex SLR cameras. In 1959, the Kilfitt factory would produce the world's first 35mm zoom lens, the 36-82 f2.8 Zoom R, designed by optical engineer Frank G. Back. The lineage of Kilfitt lens production can be traced to 1947, upon foundation of the Kilfitt Optical Factory in Munich, which would specialize in camera and lens development. Lenses manufactured by Kilfitt Optical through 1967 would be branded Kilar. The Kilfitt company would become known for designing and building unusual lenses of exceptional quality, and the Kilfitt name and products quickly gained worldwide recognition. Favored by leading photojournalists throughout the 1950s and early 1960s, Kilfitt lenses were also notable for their use by the US military, and in motion picture production. And with Walt Disney and Stanley Kubrick among the enamored, Kilfitt lenses would prove popular with Hollywood's leading film studios. Of note, in 1954 a Kilfitt Kilar 400mm f5.6 lens would take a prominent lead role in front of the camera, featuring as an instrumental prop in Alfred Hitchcock's classic thriller Rear Window, starring James Stewart and Grace Kelly. Preceding release of the Kilfitt Makro-Kilar in 1955, macro photography was principally achieved through use of focusing bellows and extension tubes, positioned between the lens and camera body. The resultant increase in lens-to-film distance often required complex exposure calculations, cross-referencing of detailed charts and tables, and physical measurement of the subject-to-film plane differential. And by means of comparison, reproduction ratios on SLR lenses of the time rarely exceeded 1:10, and minimum focus distances were comparatively vast. Revolutionary by design, the Type D Kilfitt Makro-Kilar specified an unprecedented 1:1 reproduction ratio, and a claimed close focus distance of just 5 centimeters. Described by Norman Rothschild as the first infinity to Nat's eyeball, the Makro-Kilar served to redefine macro photography and establish the design precedent of macro lenses for years to come. Kilfitt macro lenses manufactured between 1955 and 1960 were produced under contract by Cantina Octien-Gesellschaft for the Camera Construction Institution of Vaduz, situated in the Principality of Liechtenstein. Branded Kamerabau Anstalt Vaduz Kilfitt Makro-Kilar lenses are further identified from origin markings stating made in Liechtenstein, positioned within the rear lens housing or between the distance and aperture rings. In 1960, lens production relocated to the Kilfitt Großhesselohe factory, located within the Pullack municipality of Munich, in West Germany. Lenses were initially rebranded as Heinz Kilfitt München Makro-Kilar, and subsequently revised to Kilfitt München Makro-Kilar, circa 1964. Origin markings were changed to lens made in Germany, with engravings positioned on the outer lens barrel. Additional lens markings prefix DBP, an acronym for Deutsche Bundesanstalt Patenschrift, reference Kilfitt's application and pending patent registration, with the former West German Patents Office. DBP markings, with inclusion of an edition plus symbol, referencing intent for export designation, have also been identified on late series lenses manufactured in Liechtenstein, prior to the Munich relocation. In 1961, the Kilfitt Optische Fabrik Corporation and production facilities in Munich were acquired by United States defense contractor iTech Corporation of Waltham, Massachusetts. Supplemental to its consumer-oriented lens production activities, Kilfitt resources were aligned to the specialized manufacture of optical equipment for military application. In 1967, preceding Heinz Kilfitt's retirement in 1968 at age 70, and noted to be in difficulties, Kilfitt Optische Fabrik was sold to Dr. Frank Bach's American-based company, Zumar Incorporated. Under Zumar ownership, Kilfitt macro lenses would be rebranded as Zumar München Macro Zoomata, and origin markings were changed to lens made in West Germany. 40mm macro lens production is said to have continued through 1971, although the final production date is unconfirmed. Constructed with 4 elements in 3 groups, with 10 diaphragm blades, the Kilfitt macro lens optical configuration is a modified triplet design, frequently referenced to as having a Tessa-type specification. Whilst similar in appearance, the actual lens configuration more accurately depicts an Elma-type arrangement, principally differentiated through placement of the diaphragm between the first and second elements. The front first element diameter measures just 15.13 mm. Where the published lens focal length specification states 40 mm, actual image rendering correlates to a 42 mm lens field of view. The realized diagonal angle of view is 54 degrees. Kilfitt macro lenses are notable for being produced from high-density lanthanum glass. Incorporating rare earth elements to achieve a higher refractive index, low radioactive lanthanum glass is regarded for its superior sharpness and detailed rendering characteristics. Kilfitt Makro-Kilar 40mm lenses were optioned in Type D, Type E, Type A and Type P specification. The Type D designation references a double helicoid design, with a close focusing distance of 5 cm, and an image reproduction ratio of 1:1. Serial numbers for Type D variants are prefixed 211 and 245, for f3.5 and f2.8 lenses respectively. The Type E designation references a single helicoid design, with a close focusing distance of 10 cm, and an image reproduction ratio of 1:2. Type E serial numbers are prefixed 209 and 246, for f3.5 and f2.8 lenses respectively. And of relative obscurity, Type A and Type P variants encompassed a double helicoid mechanism, and specified a close focusing distance of 10 cm, and an image reproduction ratio of 1:2. Released in 1958, Type A lenses incorporated an ARRI standard mount, and were intended for application to ARRI cinema cameras. The double helicoid design facilitating infinity focus when adapted to 16mm film formats. Serial numbers for Type A lenses are prefixed 254. Type P lenses were optioned for Praktina cameras, and specified a Praktica bayonet B mount. Serial numbers for Type P lenses are prefixed 255. Seemingly unique to Kilfitt macro lenses, the subject close focus distance is measured from the front of the lens body, as distinct from the film or sensor plane. Addition of the lens body measurement at full extension, and a camera's flange focal distance is required, to determine the true minimum focus distance as now commonly defined. At the close focus setting, depth of field parameters at aperture setting f2.8 are extreme, measuring just 2.2 and 3.1 mm for Type D and Type E lenses respectively. Kilfitt Makro-Kilar lenses incorporate a rotary helicoid drive system. Rotation of the focus ring and subsequent extension or contraction of the lens barrel cause a corresponding rotation of internal lens elements, the aperture mechanism, and aperture position settings. As a consequence, changes to the aperture settings subsequent to determining the focus positioning can cause the focus to shift. Selection of the intended aperture setting prior to focusing is recommended to ensure critical focus is maintained. Kilfitt macro lenses of f3.5 specification encompass a freely rotating aperture ring. There is no physical click demarcation of f-stop intervals. The minimum aperture setting is f22. Lenses of f2.8 specification incorporate a preset aperture mechanism. And aperture positioning is defined by discernible click stops in full stop increments through f22. For mirrorless application, the preset mechanism serves no function other than to provide a hard stop against which the minimum aperture can be predetermined. At minimum focus extension, Kilfitt Macro Type D lenses of f3.5 specification extend 39mm from the camera mount, increasing to 77mm at the close focus setting. The lens diameter is 61.5mm, and the lens weight is 145 grams. Kilfitt Macro f2.8 Type E lenses measure 40mm from the camera mount at minimum focus extension, increasing to 58mm at the close focus setting. The lens diameter is 63mm, and the published lens weight ranges from 150 to 180 grams. Kilfitt marketing literature states, the exclusive Kilfitt design permits continuous focusing, with perfect lens to film plane parallel, from infinity to extreme close-ups. To facilitate such function in application, Kilfitt lenses incorporate separate scales to identify the subject to image reproduction ratio, and the exposure compensation adjustment factor required, due to light fall-off as the lens barrel is extended. Aperture values are also engraved on both sides of the aperture ring, making allowance for rotation of the aperture position when focusing, due to incorporation of the rotating helicoid drive mechanism. The inclusion of 3 color dot markings on selected f2.8 lens nameplates further serve to identify lenses of apochromatic specification. In the pursuit of rendering accuracy, apochromatic lenses are designed to strictly correct axial chromatic aberration and eliminate color shifts on the focal plane, improving image contrast and resolution. Referencing the 3 primary color wavelengths, apochromatic markings on late Lichtenstein lens production were sequenced red-blue-yellow, and subsequently revised to blue-red-yellow, for early 1960s German production branded Heinz Kilfitt München. Kilfitt 40mm Makro-Kilar lenses were supplied in a multitude of permanent lens mount options. The lens mount determination was specified by the initial purchaser, by a nomination of a designated Kilfitt camera code upon ordering. Lenses incorporating an exacta mount specification would prove to be among the most popular, and are among the most readily available options today. Adaptation of filters to Kilfitt Macro f2.8 lenses necessitates use of a proprietary Kilfitt Series 5 filter holder. Originally a no-cost accompanying accessory, the now rare cone-shaped aluminium adapter positions a 30.2mm Series 5 filter deep within the lens housing. The close proximity to the lens first element is said to minimize the image degrading effect of dust, scratches, or potential flaws in the filter used. Inclusion of a 48mm filter thread on f3.5 lenses and early f2.8 lenses manufactured in Lichtenstein enables adaptation to the front lens housing of accessories and Type 7 filters with use of an appropriate filter holder. Of supplemental advantage, positioning of the lens elements deep within the lens housing inherently serves to limit the ingress of stray light, inadvertently fulfilling the function of a lens hood. Application of a magnesium fluoride single lens coating characteristically exhibits front element reflections of magenta or cyan. first identified via inclusion of a red letter C on the lens nameplate. Coating identifiers were subsequently changed for lenses manufactured in Munich, with the word macro engraved in red. Reference has also been made to the application of coatings on the rear lens element, for lenses of apochromatic specification, whereby it is speculated that the coating deposition was used in part to correct color wavelength transmission. Of notable rarity today, Kilfitt Makro lenses were selectively supplied with a plastic bubble casing, metal screw type or plastic push-fit front lens cap, a branded metal rear element protective cover, and a supplemental printed depth of field reference book. This is a fully manually controlled lens when adapted to DSLR, or modern mirrorless cameras. There are no electrical contact points between the lens and camera body. Operations that would otherwise rely on electronic communication between the camera and lens, including auto-exposure metering and image stabilization, will not function. EXIF data is not transferable. Distributed in the United States by Kling Photo Corporation, Kilfitt Makro-Kilar retail list prices in 1955 and 1958, for lenses of f3.5 Type D and f2.8 Type E specification, were $114 and $119 respectively. Utilizing Leica's 50mm Type M Summicron f2 lens to provide a price-constant ratio, Kilfitt price equivalents in 2024 approximate $2,093 and $2,176. Availability of Kilfitt Makro-Kilar lenses today in good condition on eBay and Japanese auction sites is rare. Transacted sales prices in early 2024 for lenses in working condition range from $76 to $500. Asking prices from dedicated eBay retail stores extend upward to $750. Kilfitt lenses in M42 mount specification will generally command a premium. US distributor Kling Photo's 1963 Kilfitt lens dealer notebook states, Kilar lenses are distinguished not only by their fine optical performance, but also by their lightweight and superb mechanical quality and finish. In hand, and commensurate to its intended purpose, the Kilfitt lens build quality is excellent. Likened to assembly of a fine vintage watch, Kilfitt lenses were designed with an emphasis on precision, tactility and nurtured durability, as distinct from outright ruggedness. In 2024, some 70 years later, the experience of using a Kilfitt Makro-Kilar lens in premium condition can be compared favorably, or indeed surpass that of many modern specialized lenses. The lens barrel, lens mount, aperture rings and internal structural components are of solid metal construction. A striated rubberized focusing ring covers the metal focus mechanism and facilitates precise unsighted adjustments. Believed to be the first of its type, and unremarkable by today's standards, the incorporation of a rubber ring by Kilfitt from 1948 was a revolutionary advancement in ergonomics that set a precedent other manufacturers would follow in the years to come. It would take Topcon 15 years to first specify rubber rings on RE lenses in 1963, and 26 years for Nikon to incorporate a rubber focus ring into a lens design, with the launch of the K-type Nikon 50mm 1.4 in August 1974. The Kilfitt Makro-Kilar Type E lens focus ring rotates smoothly through an approximate 315 degrees. Type D lenses of double helicoid specification rotate through an approximate 330 degrees. The lens layout and design is clean, clear and intuitive, and mechanical movements are light, tactile and precise. The exceptionally long focus throw facilitates precise and accurate focusing. However, where advantageous for obtaining critical focus on static and slow-moving subjects, the long throw can prove limiting for applications requiring quick focus adjustments. Kilfitt Makro lenses are unsuited to fast-moving sports or rapid street photography applications. Of note, as specific to Type D, Type P and Type A lenses, the feeling of a light yet discernible torque resistance mid-rotation, as the second helicoid is engaged, is normal. As a side note, and referencing Kilfitt's fastidious commitment to quality, lens-specific test results for Kilfitt telephoto lenses of 90mm and above were originally captured on 2 glass plates, with the taking camera affixed to a tripod mounted in concrete within the basement of the Kilfitt factory. The use of glass plates was necessitated by Kilfitt, as film was not deemed flat enough for accurate test results. Demonstrating an unsurpassed expression of confidence in product performance, one of the plates was supplied to the customer, with an accompanying 8x magnifying glass, whilst the second plate was retained by the factory, as reference for future servicing requirements. Although comprising a comparative small number of parts, and of apparent simple structure, Kilfitt macro lens mechanisms are known to be complex, and serviceability can be difficult. Alignment of the helicoid to one of 26 screw-in positions, whilst ensuring correct rotation of the optical path to enable infinity focus, and maintaining consistency with the distance ring index value, is said to be especially difficult. Whilst Kilfitt macro lenses are known to maintain a high level of optical transparency, inherently characteristic to any lens produced more than half a century ago, degradation of vapor deposit lens coatings is common, as evidenced by cracking, peeling, and whitening of the lens surface. Lens clouding and diminished contrast may also be attributable to breakage or deterioration of the balsam layer between the third and fourth elements. A common failing of Kilfitt macro lenses, visual identification of integrity is problematic, due to the deep recess of lens elements. Appearance of a rainbow-colored ring within the optical structure may serve as an indicator of fault. And where a tapered cutaway to the rear lens metal housing was intended to provide clearance for a camera's mirror path, the lens protrusion nevertheless is known to interfere with the mirror movement on selected SLR and DSLR applications. Further compromised, the outer lens element near flushly aligns with the base of the rear metal lens housing. Vulnerability to scratching or damage from unintended lens contact is high. In the absence of a protective rear lens cap, extreme care should be taken to avoid surface contact when positioning the lens upright. Where Kilfitt would innovate with incorporation of a lens rubber focus ring. In context, plastics and rubber production technology of the early 1950s was in its relative infancy. Kilfitt rubber focus rings are inherently prone to severe degradation, deformation, and cracking. Whilst cosmetically distracting, there is no impact on optical performance. The principal function of a macro lens is to facilitate photographing objects close up and at high magnification, enabling true-to-life rendering of fine subject details. However, supplemental to its primary objective, Kilfitt Makro-Kilar lenses are today perhaps better appreciated for their versatile and unique capabilities functioning as a standard prime lens. Known for providing a grounded naturalistic image rendering and a sense of simplicity and rawness, standard lenses feel neither intrusive nor detached. Applications include documentary, lifestyle, landscape, and general studio photography. Alternative macro lens options for SLR cameras throughout the 1950s simply did not exist. It would take Nikon some 6 years to release its first macro lens, the Micro Nikkor 5.5cm f3.5 in August 1961. And it would be another 4 years before Canon released the FL 50mm f3.5 macro lens, in 1965. Although somewhat compromised, use of an adapter was required to achieve a 1:1 reproduction ratio. Period 40mm standard prime lens alternatives included the 1952 Carl Zeiss Jena DDR Tessa 40mm f4.5T, the 1950 Olympus Zuiko 4cm f2.8, and the renowned Voigtlander Scopagon 40mm f2, released in 1961. Kilfitt marketing literature states, the Makro-Kilar is a 4-element lens with exceptional resolving power and light transmission. It is fully corrected for use with color as well as black and white film, and gives excellent definition to the extreme edges. When adapted to Sony's 60.2 megapixel A7R4 full-frame digital camera, the Kilfitt Makro 40mm f3.5 lens image resolving performance is excellent for aperture settings falling between f5.6 and f16. Center sharpness across all aperture settings is uniform and consistent. Modern Photography's December 1955 review stated, the 40mm Kilfitt Makro f3.5 lens is sharp from edge to edge at f3.5, and received a rating better than many other top-grade lenses available at the time. As tested today, corner sharpness viewed at 100% magnification is marginally reduced for aperture settings falling below f5.6, and contrast is notably low. The 2/3 stop light advantage, afforded by the revised f2.8 lens specification introduced in 1958, comes at the expense of diminished sharpness for Kilfitt Makro f2.8 lens aperture settings falling below f8, although contrast is notably improved. At the wider f2.8 and f4 aperture settings, center and corner sharpness is soft. For aperture settings above f5.6, center sharpness is assessed as good, and corner sharpness becomes acceptable through f11. For stop-down images, minor application of the detail slider in Lightroom will effectively correct for residual rendering deficiencies in the periphery of the frame. Maximum center and corner image resolving performance is realized at f16, comparing favorably to other premium lens offerings of the time. Kilfitt 40mm macro lens distortion characteristics are impressively controlled, with only minor barrel distortion evident. Uniform in radius and appearance, an application of 4 and 2 points distortion correction in Lightroom will adjust for linear horizontal and vertical misalignment on f3.5 and f2.8 variants respectively. Optical vignetting occurs naturally in all lenses. Illumination falloff is unavoidable as light rays at the periphery of the lens travel longer than those in the center. At the close focus setting, f2.8 Type E Kilfitt macro lenses exhibit moderate vignetting for aperture settings falling between f2.8 and 5.6. Light falloff increases exponentially as focus shifts to infinity, requiring up to 2.5 stops exposure adjustment at the widest aperture setting. For f3.5 Type D lenses, minimal vignetting is apparent at the close focus setting. Image compromising sensor reflections are evident for aperture settings of f5.6 and above, leading to low contrast bright spots in the center of the frame. Optically corrected for close focus application, vignetting is extreme at the infinity focus setting. A corrective exposure adjustment of up to 3.5 stops at the edge of the frame is required at the widest aperture setting. Romanticized notions of a specific lens, or brand's unique color rendering, are mostly dispelled when lighting variables are eliminated, and capture settings aligned. Under controlled lighting conditions, with white balance and ISO settings matched, Kilfitt macro lens color rendition is perceptually accurate, neutral, and consistent across all aperture settings. When referenced against modern professional lenses, Kilfitt 40mm macro lenses exhibit minor color cast variance, with tones minimally skewed toward yellow and green. Accurate color rendering is achieved, with only minor correction to the blue and green channels within the curve's adjustment layer. The convergence of light rays and color wavelength dispersion on the image plane is accurately controlled across all aperture settings for Kilfitt Makro f2.8 and f3.5 lens variants. Validating marketing claims referencing critical color correction, longitudinal chromatic aberration and lateral transverse chromatic aberration is perceptually absent. Comatic aberration for light sources positioned at the corner of the frame is visible across all aperture settings on both f2.8 and 3.5 Kilfitt lens variants. At aperture f5.6 and above, aberrations are partially masked by optical diffraction. At the widest aperture setting, Kilfitt Makro f2.8 Type E lenses render specular highlights uniformly and consistently in the center of the frame, with minimal distortion at the close focus setting. Minor elliptical cat's eye bokeh is evident, toward the periphery of the frame. The 10 aperture blade specification facilitates round and precise circular delineation of light sources. At f5.6, bokeh transitions to decagonal, and rendering becomes uniform at the edge of the frame. For Kilfitt Makro f3.5 Type D lenses, enlargement of specular highlights in rendering is evident due to compressed depth of field parameters at the close focus setting. Whilst aesthetically pleasing, the effect is reduced as distance to the subject matter is increased. Bokeh rendering characteristics are uniform and consistent with lenses of f2.8 Type E specification. The optical lens design tends toward overcorrection of aberrations, evidenced by pronounced light gathering at the edge of the light circles. At normal shooting distances, the transition from in-focus composition to out-of-focus elements at wide aperture settings is gradual and linear. Focus delineation for both f2.8 and f3.5 lens variants is perceptually absent. Halation is the spreading of light beyond an object's intended boundary, characteristically forming a fog or bloom around highlights and the edges of a light source. For Kilfitt Makro f2.8 lens variants, blooming of highlights is evident with images captured at the widest f2.8 aperture setting. Stop down to f4, and the effect is fully constrained. Flaring occurs when direct or stray light reflects off internal lens elements, aperture blades or the camera sensor. Flaring can lead to glowing artifacts, patches of haze and low image contrast. It can also be used intentionally for artistic and creative effect. Kilfitt Makro 40mm f3.5 Type D lenses exhibit minor flaring across all aperture settings. Where ghosting is strongly pronounced, veiling for light sources outside the lens field of view is well controlled. For Kilfitt f2.8 Type E variants, direct light rendering is diffused, resulting in image haze and diminished contrast. Ghosting from internal lens reflections is effectively controlled. Sensor flare is apparent for both f3.5 and f2.8 Kilfitt lens variants. Whilst of advanced specification for their time. In 2024, it is difficult to recommend Kilfitt 40mm macro lenses for their principal intended purpose. For macro application, modern cheaper lenses with computationally corrected profiles will likely produce perceptually sharper and more uniform results. Further compromised, to achieve a high reproduction ratio, the 40mm focal length requires positioning of the lens extremely close to the subject matter. Application of external lighting becomes complex, and there is a propensity to cast shadows over the intended composition. Vignetting is also extreme at infinity focus settings, and minimal depth of field parameters for wide aperture positions serves to be impractical in application. Focus stacking becomes essential. And yet in general application, there is much to be said in favor of Kilfitt Makro-Kilar 40mm lenses. Lens build quality is excellent, and f3.5 variants are notably sharp to the edge, across all aperture settings. Distortion and aberrations are impressively controlled, bokeh rendering is pleasant and symmetrical, and the mechanical movement facilitates precise, tactile and accurate focusing, that most modern lenses simply cannot match. Image rendering is praised by users for its neutral and accurate characteristics, and is said to exhibit a dry expressiveness and absence of individuality, a characteristic advantageous for accurate and true-to-life reproduction. Whilst the rationale for ownership today objectively falls short, Kilfitt macro lenses remain highly valued by their owners for their historical significance, multifaceted functionality, tactile engagement and excellent rendering performance. Increasingly rare and eminently practical, Kilfitt 40mm Makro-Kilar lenses make for a valuable addition to any vintage lens collection.